Good morning. You guys are a bigger group than I thought you would be this morning. Way to go. The confirmation class, the 8th graders, are in Grand Rapids, Michigan this morning to go to Mars Hill Church where Rob Bell speaks. He is a good speaker, so they get to see a good speaker this morning, and you guys are here. Thank you. Last week we talked about the Garden of Gethsemane, the last day of Jesus' life, how it was like the worst day anyone could ever really imagine. At the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus asked his friends to do this one thing for him, this one thing. Can you stay awake and pray with me? And of course, we all know they failed. They fell asleep. They screwed up. The one thing Jesus asked them to do, he said, this one thing, before I die, I want you to do this for me. And they took a nap instead. And I was thinking about this story of Jesus and how it came to happen that Jesus had to die. And I think that's one of the things that I always struggled with. I always thought, if Jesus was such a good guy, who would kill him? And I got this idea in my head because when I was a kid, I watched movies. I watched a lot of Disney movies. And the people that kill good guys in movies are usually bad guys. You guys know what I'm talking about. The people that kill good guys are usually the bad guys. And in kids' movies, the bad guys are really, really, really unambiguously evil. That's what people who make movies do. They want to make sure you know right away who the bad guy is. They want to make sure you're not rooting for the bad guy. They want to make sure that you're happy at the end of the movie when the bad guy loses because they make the bad guy so bad. I was thinking about the Grinch. The Grinch was ugly. The Grinch hated children. The Grinch hated Christmas. The Grinch hated laughter. The Grinch was mean to dogs. They painted this picture in like the first 5 minutes of the Grinch so that you knew that the bad guy was really, 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 really evil. Bad guys are often bank robbers or murderers. They sell drugs. They have secret hideouts inside of volcanoes. You guys know who the bad guy is. And the problem with the story of Jesus' death is that the bad guys who killed Jesus weren't really that bad. They weren't evil. They tried to help people. There's no story in the Bible that tells us of any of the real bad guys who killed Jesus going off and kicking a dog or stealing candy from a child. The people that killed Jesus were church people. The people who killed Jesus were church people. And you're a church people, and I'm a church people. And the thing that scares me about this story is that the people who killed Jesus were a lot like I am. That's scary to think about. The people who killed Jesus did a lot of the same things that I do. They went to church. They tried to be good. They knew they weren't perfect, but they tried to follow some rules. They thought they were more good than bad. They thought they were at least better at being good than those people over there. They didn't sell drugs. They didn't hit people. They didn't murder children. They were not terrible people. I don't know if you just heard me describe that, but what I'm just describing to you is myself. I feel like I'm a pretty good guy. I don't punch babies. I don't sell crack. I try to do good things. I try to follow the rules. And that's exactly what the people did who were trying to kill Jesus, because they were a lot like me. And probably they were a lot like you too. So how did this happen? How does it happen that a bunch of pretty good people end up killing a really good person? And it comes from this prophecy. I'm going to read you this prophecy. I'm going to explain it because it's not going to make a lot of sense. A prophecy is what someone who lived before Jesus is trying to tell people about what Jesus is going to be like. They talk to God. They have this communication link with God. And so they say, Jesus is going to be like this. And that way you can look back on these prophecies and say, you know what? You're not Jesus because they said you were going to be this, and you're not. And this is one of the prophecies. You might recognize parts of it. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. His name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. This is the part I want you to hear. He will sit upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. It's from Isaiah chapter 9. And this is the one piece of Scripture that religious leaders 2,000 years ago were really hung up on, because it makes it sound like Jesus is going to be a king. And their frame of reference for a king is someone like King David, who had a big army, or someone like King Solomon, who had a ton of money. And they're thinking that a king has to look like that. And so Jesus shows up, and Jesus meets all these prophecies. He was born in the right town at the right time. He never broke a bone in his body. He was born of a virgin. He meets all of these prophecies, except this one kind of throws him for a loop, because Jesus was not a king. Jesus didn't have a lot of money. Jesus didn't have a big army. And what the religious leaders didn't realize was that you don't have to have an army or a lot of money to be a king. You just need people who follow you and obey you. You don't need money or an army to be a king. You just need people who will follow you and obey you. Did Jesus have people who followed him and obeyed him? It's 2,000 years later. He still has people who followed him and obey him. I would say he qualifies for king status. But what they didn't like about this king was that they expected a king who was going to make their lives easier. He was going to destroy their enemies with an army and just give them money from his bank. They didn't want the kind of king that Jesus was. They didn't understand the kind of king that Jesus was. And since they didn't understand it and they didn't really believe in it, they decided he didn't fulfill the prophecy. And if he didn't fulfill the prophecy, he couldn't be the Messiah. And if you're a religious leader 2,000 years ago, anyone claiming to be the Messiah is a problem, especially if they aren't really the Messiah. Let me explain to you what would happen if I started trying to convince you that I was the Son of God right now. I'm not going to try to do that because none of you would believe me, because you're all smarter than that. One of the prophecies was that the Messiah would never have a bone broken in his body. And when I was 4 years old, my mom ran me over with a car and broke every bone in my foot. So I clearly do not qualify. But if I tried to convince you that I was the Messiah, the first thing that would happen would be that one of the adults in this room would come carry me off the stage, probably Matt, because he's the biggest, and they would take me off and they would say, what's the matter with you? Then I would lose my job, and then they would put me in something called a mental institution. That's what would happen right now if I tried to convince you that I was the Son of God and you didn't believe me. 2,000 years ago, they didn't have mental institutions. They had two pieces of wood that were crudely nailed together. And that's where Jesus hung. And the closest thing that anyone ever had to a charge against him wasn't that he was bad. It wasn't that he hurt people. It wasn't that he didn't help people. It was just that they didn't believe him and they didn't understand him. And so he had to die at the hands of church people. Here's what this means for us, guys. And this is what I wrestle with. If I was alive 2,000 years ago and I was pretty much the same way that I am now, I would probably be a lot like those people that killed Jesus. I might even hang out with some of them. Shoot, I might have even been one of them. And that scares me because I'm trying so hard, and I know some of you are trying so hard to be this way. And the way that a lot of us are trying to be is the exact same way that the people who killed Jesus were. They knew a lot of rules. They tried really, really hard to meet most of them, to be good, to at least be better than the person next to them. And the problem with all that is they were so busy focused on following rules and trying to be good that they didn't notice when God was standing right in front of them. So we leave here sometimes on Sunday mornings, and I like to give you something to think about or something to do, and a lot of times you leave here and you think, I need to be nicer to my parents, or I need to tell someone about Jesus, or I need to go help my neighbor, or there's some action or thing that you need to do, and I'm not going to give you one of those today. I'm going to tell you today that if you want to be the way that God wants you to be, you don't need to worry all the time about the list. You just need to try to love God more tomorrow than you do today. You need to look for Him. You need to have a relationship with Him. You need to be closer to Jesus tomorrow than you were today. And if you're seeking God and you're seeking to have a relationship with God, then you won't be the kind of person that would just hang Him on a cross when He's standing in front of you, because you just might notice Him. I'm going to give you some time this morning to talk about this in your small groups. I know this is a big idea that's tough to get around, so I don't expect you to leave this morning with a lot of answers. But I want you to start thinking, are you trying really hard to follow some rules, or are you trying really hard every day to love God